Even in the smallest of things, if we open our eyes, if we experience them with intention, we can distill down and learn from them. There's so many different versions of courage. It shows up in so many different ways. Have you intentionally worked on the things within yourself in preparation for those experiences?
The best of the best outcomes are just as possible as the worst of the worst, but also the vice versa. So I keep my expectations in check so I don't build something up and then get crushed when it doesn't happen. And then I also don't live in a state of fear and dread.
I think a lot of people instinctively are self-critical, and that's where there's this intuition for most people. But what a lot of people use is escapism tactics into your phone, social media, addictions of some sort, just to face that.
It comes down to the practice of doing the thing.
Yes.
Doing the work.
I wanted to be that person more than I was afraid of the thing that was in front of me. I can't think of a single founder or someone who's really built a company that doesn't have that in them. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Transferable Everything podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about chapter 4, and the topic is courage. So I'm going to start by reading a quote by Aristotle. And the quote is, "You will never do anything in this world without courage. It is the greatest quality of the mind next to honor." And so as a nod to the Stoics and so much of their wisdom, every chapter actually begins with a Stoic quote. I think that just sort of embodies the deeper message. But since we're talking about courage today, just before we went live, James and I were talking about everything we're doing right now. So we're in the process where the podcast is now live. Socials have gone out. Our first episode hasn't posted yet, but
by the time you see this, you'll have already watched it all the way through. And you loved it, right?
Nailed it.
Smoked it.
That said, our social media posts have started, and so there's clips, and the idea of Transferable Everything is out there now. And so something that I've experienced through this journey of working on writing the book Transferable Everything, although it hasn't gone out yet, but now that the podcast is going out and social media posts with Transferable Everything as this trademark idea and business, I can't overstate how much courage I've had to muster within myself,
right,
to put my ideas out there into the world. And obviously, I'm not working alone on this, but I hold some responsibility for the beginning stages of the ideas and trying to work through them and all of that.
Sure.
And putting my name and face behind the ideas. And it's a different version of courage. And I think that's one of the central messages today that we'll end up talking about is there's so many different versions of courage. It shows up in so many different ways, and some are more challenging than others. Some require different levels of courage within us. And so anyways, I just wanted to sort of put that out there as something that I can recognize that has been challenging. I've had moments of almost self-sabotage where I've had to catch myself delaying putting things out there out of fear. It didn't show, it wasn't clear that it was fear. My brain was coming up with some really good reasons why I shouldn't.
Like just manifesting as certain kinds of uncertainty.
Sure, yeah. And so recognizing that even in our subconscious, fear can exist.
Sure.
But in our consciousness, it shows up as something different. But at the root of it, it is fear. And having gone through this now, it's a affirmation of that, the existence of that within our own minds, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's a daunting thing to be putting yourself out on a public platform and opening yourself up to scrutiny and criticism particularly when you have so many other things going on, where this obviously, depending on how many people watch it, is going to have an impact on perception one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's scary, and rightfully so. There's a good reason to be afraid of that. It's not from nothing either. And so I think that's it. It is important, but most of what we want to do in the chapter is break apart the different parts of courage. And I have lots of examples that in this particular chapter where it currently stands that I think are really beautiful examples of courage, ultimately sort of landing at the pinnacle of courage and the type of courage that ultimately is useful in the Transferable Everything framework. But before we get to that, I'll touch on one example of courage that showed up for me. So I'm terrified of heights. And multiple times in my life, I've had to face the fear of heights. Two particular times of this. One in particular in the military, becoming a paratrooper. So doing my jump course, jumping out of helicopters and airplanes. Horrifying for somebody that's afraid of heights. That being said, I wanted to be that person more than I was afraid of the thing that was in front of me.
But yes, courage taking multiple shapes and forms, but ultimately having a root. I believe you're getting at more or less fear being the thing that courage is required to overcome.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And the fear of what? And so there's very clear, obvious ones. So I was using the example of jumping out of airplanes or helicopters if you're afraid of heights, or in firefighting, climbing up, ladders high up on the external side of a building in what might feel like an uncertain environment,
right,
and so forth. And so there's fear in front of you of the thing. It's very apparent. It's it touches on the primal part of your brain because it feels consequential. It's binary. It's like either the equipment works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, that's it. And so it's one or the other. And so I think for most people, that's easy for them to understand because it is binary. It's one dimensional. This could lead to a terrible outcome, and it has for millions of years for people, or it doesn't. But why roll the dice on something that feels so one or the other in terms of outcomes? And so that's one component of fear. I don't know, can you think of a moment where fear showed up in that primal way for you?
Oh, all the time. But also I have a weird brain. So I think about things like heights, for instance, or for me, what's the difference between 2 feet or 2,000 feet? If I fall on my head, there's no real difference. I'm cooked either way.
Sure.
So I kind of have weird tricks to rationalize or get over my fears or create new fears for myself, like falling down the stairs.
Sure.
I get it all the time. I'm a very clumsy person. I rolled my ankle really bad a couple months ago walking down a 3-step flight of stairs. Completely snapped my ankle. Great. So now stairs freak me out. So there's loads of weird fears, but in the case of stairs, I have no choice but to walk up or down them. I have to. It's a consequence of being alive.
Yeah. I think this is actually a perfect example, and I wasn't sure what you would come up with, but I'm glad it's exactly this because it seems so small and minute because
benign.
It's an everyday thing. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I've been trying to wrap my brain around in terms of using my own personal stories inside of the book Transferable Everything is, although they're cool and in some cases novel for a lot of people who have never, say, served in the military, conversely, for those who have, it's benign to them.
Sure.
And so it's this weird
levels
paradox.
to this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And totally appreciate that. But for the people who haven't, it's like this experience that might seem out of reach. But the undercurrent of transferable everything is that we can learn these principles through the most benign experiences,
Right.
like walking up or down the stairs and the fear after an injury.
Sure.
And now you have to overcome it. And because effectively the same tools that you would have to draw on in that moment are the exact same tools if the fear was 10x that.
Yeah.
It's the same tools
Sure.
that you have to pull from.
And to not face that fear, to be fair, especially with the benign things, the consequences are severe.
Yes.
So what if I decided I don't go up or downstairs anymore?
Right.
Or like I can compare it to my grandmother. Years ago, broke her ankle, and she was virtually bedbound after that, even though she could walk. She
Right.
was just so scared of breaking her ankle again that the remaining years of her life were spent in a bed.
Right. That's that's the perfect example. And so what I want everyone to know, not just in this chapter in courage, but for every aspect of transferable everything, is that you don't have to experience something novel and something so distinct and seemingly life-changing in order to learn a very valuable lesson. It can be in the smallest detail, like you just described. And, I learned part of this through that experience, through jumping out of airplanes and helicopters, and you learned it walking down the stairs. Same thing. We both ended up at the exact same point.
Sure.
So the need for this like vast array of worldly experience, although beautiful and valuable, and I love experience more than anybody, but it also isn't always necessary. And so even in the smallest of things, if we open our eyes, if we experience them with intention, we can distill down and learn from them.
And yeah, to your point, I mean, fear is such like a universal human experience. Not everybody lives an extraordinary life, but everybody experiences fear. It can be extracted, or, I mean, learning about your fears and how you might have overcome them, or extracting lessons about courage and overcoming fears can come from virtually anything, from, like you said, a tiny house spider to skydiving.
Yes, exactly. One of the other points of fear is like, okay, so I used the example of jumping out of airplanes, helicopters, but that was a choice. So like I consciously chose to face my fear. Now there are also examples of fear that we don't choose.
Right.
And they show up in our life, right? It's the difference between controllables and uncontrollables. So that was like a fear I couldn't control, but I was able to control the environment. I made a choice to step into this environment of fear. And so there's a little bit that's maybe easier at times, even though it was like an extreme fear, because I felt an element of control within myself where I said, yes, Daniel, we're going to do this, despite those fears. Then there's the fear that shows up when we don't want it to.
Sure.
And that could look, that shows up in so many different ways. I see this as a firefighter. If you show up to a scene where it's, for that person, potentially the worst day of their life, or a really horrible day where they're facing their fears at the highest level, more often than not, a level of uncertainty or tragedy.
Sure.
And so that's like one component. For me, my wife and I, we experienced this with the birth of our first child. I almost lost my wife, and I get into this in the book, and it was a really horrifying experience that neither of us could have anticipated.
Right.
For me in particular, there's just so much that she doesn't remember, but for me, sitting there and watching all of this unfold and knowing that, this could go one way or the other, created all of this fear inside of me.
Sure.
And I think that's another interesting part about fear, and it's why we have those primal instincts, because it's there to keep us safe from the uncontrollables wherever possible.
Sure. And uncontrolled fear or unanticipated fear it also hit you in really weird, unexpected ways as well. This is a really funny example, and like I'm almost embarrassed to bring it up. But when I was in Iceland on my honeymoon with Jess, and on the last day of my trip, I went to Hafthor Bjornsson's gym because I wanted to buy a T-shirt.
Right.
And then his dad walks in and he goes, "Oh, would you like to meet Hafthor?" Sure. So I walk in and then I look up to the sky, to the biggest man I've ever seen in my entire life. And oddly, this weird sense of dread just washed over me, where I'm like, this guy could just kill me right now. Like it was a weird fear that I didn't anticipate having in that moment.
Right. It's sort of like
The nicest guy ever, by the way. Shook my hand, took a photo with me.
Wow.
He was a really, really nice dude. But like in that moment, I was like, holy smokes, I feel really uncomfortable right now. Like it was a fight or flight response where I was like, I need to get out of here right now.
Sure. And, maybe that's a clear case of biological evolution.
100%. You see a big gorilla in the woods, you're like, I gotta go.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting that there's in our subconscious these things, they show up even when we don't expect them to. And then the question becomes like, have you intentionally worked on the things within yourself in preparation for those experiences?
Sure.
Some people do intentionally, maybe because they had a bad experience and now they realize, okay, I need to intentionally build a toolkit in preparation for these moments. Other people might have developed it by accident as a byproduct of something else that they were working on. I think this is where something like athletics in particular is so great, because you have to face your fears of being ridiculed by the other team's parents or the criticism from your coach or other parents and so forth. And so even if you don't intentionally do it, it can, for some, become a bit of a byproduct. Obviously, that's something that's very interesting to us is, how can we run a parallel for athletes where we can intentionally teach those things through the experience as a form of education. But sort of putting that aside, there's the people who, unfortunately, haven't had the experience or intentionally built the toolkit or haven't been able to learn from the experiences. And so they get into these scenarios, and hopefully they're more innocuous ones where it's like this immediate dread, but then they can get out of there. But unfortunately, tragedy or hardship is going to come for all of us.
Sure.
In one way or another. It shows up different, but it's inevitable, because death is inevitable, which means every single person is going to lose somebody in their family, no matter what we do. And that's incredibly hard.
Sure.
Almost everybody is at some point going to lose a job or, have to face rejection, whether it's with a relationship, a friendship, romantic partner. Like there's so many different forms, and some might feel worse than others to different people, but it's something that's universal. It's a universal experience for all of us at some point. The only thing that we can control is how prepared we are and what's the toolkit that we have ready when these moments arrive.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday. This is something I'm gonna ask for you to consider or like piece apart a little bit.
Yeah, please.
And it comes from the world of computing. So do you know what a bit is? Like a bit within the computing world? I'm also stepping a little outside of my wheelhouse, so if I get any of this wrong, please rip me apart in the comments. But there's ones and zeros.
Okay, yeah.
So you can think of it as a state of yes or of no, real, not real, what have you. Then you have quantum bits, a qubit, where you have a bit that can be both states at the same time. It's simultaneously a 1 and a 0. And it doesn't become a 1 or a 0 until observed. Now, that's the part I think I might be wrong on. But regardless, what I'm trying to draw to is that one of the ways that I have dealt with fear of, let's call it result, if I'm given a certain amount of information, but not enough to determine or observe what the result is going to be, I see it as being a 1 or a 0.
Right.
Now, I personally have to assume that both outcomes are existing at the same time until I'm able to actually receive enough information to determine what that outcome is going to be. So when it comes to really heavy things like life or death or what have you, I have to assume that both outcomes are equally possible.
Yeah.
And that's how I overcome some of the more crippling fear in life that could keep me from wanting to get up out of bed and like actually operate, is that the best of the best outcomes are just as possible as the worst of the worst, but also the vice versa. So I keep my expectations in check so I don't build something up and then get crushed when it doesn't happen. And then I also don't live in a state of fear and dread, assuming that the worst case scenario is going to happen definitively.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you utilize this experience, you utilize this analogy in a way that both good and bad exists, and so you're intentionally choosing to look at the good.
No, I'm intentionally. It's like the cat in the box. Is it alive or is it dead?
Right.
Until I open the box, I don't know. So it's both alive and dead at the same time. So I in parallel accept both possibilities as reality. That way I don't get crushed and weighed down by this weight of despair. And neither do I build myself up to like a set of expectations where I assume the greatest outcome possible is the correct one.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so you're concurrently managing expectations, and you're not allowing yourself to get too enthusiastic about a particular outcome.
That's right.
Until you know definitively that that outcome does exist.
Sure.
And you're also preparing yourself concurrently for the worst outcome because it is on the table.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that that's a healthy way to sort of like manage your emotions. Otherwise, I have to imagine you're going to experience a level of manic episodes all the time, because there's, we talk about this in business, is like, especially on the sales side, you have a sales opportunity. It might be very warm and it might look great, but until you sign that contract, you hold you hold the expectation that this is not official until that line.
Yeah, it's all to say you can be hopeful for the future and you can plan for it, but you shouldn't make decisions based on a future that's uncertain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's finding balance within. That's more of like that yin and yang approach. And it is important to prepare for the worst outcome when it's on the table, right? So another example is, as a firefighter, we show up to a medical call, and somebody who's, we get only limited information. So we show up having to expect both outcomes. On one hand, we hope the person is okay as we find them and that they will be okay. But we walk in there with a tool bag, defibrillator, medical kit, and everything for first aid. And we show up in there also knowing that we need to be prepared that they're VSA, worst case scenario, they're non-responsive, and we need to work on them. And so it feels similar. And I would say at a response, and repetition helps, is that, when I'm almost agnostic walking in the door to a call, it's like I haven't crossed that bridge. I'm just prepared. I haven't even attempted to cross a bridge until I know it's in front of me.
Right.
Because if my emotions aren't in check as well, then I can't effectively do the work. If I'm like, oh my goodness, this person's going to be in this state and this is going to be terrible, then like I'm walking in just like white knuckling every single time. Or I'm going in there like, oh yeah, they're going to be great.
Right.
Now I'm unprepared. I'm not ready to move quick enough, or it hurts that much more if you find the alternative.
Yeah. So to take that and pull it back to courage specifically,
Yes.
where does courage lie in that equation that I've just presented? Is it a courageous act to accept that the worst case scenario might be the real one? Is it facing the reality that you might not actually get what you want and you're keeping that in check? Would you call that a courageous act, or do you think it's something else?
No, I think that's because there's so many forms of courage, there's multiple steps in there that require a level of courage. I think knowing that the worst outcome could exist and you will have to face it in of itself shows courage. And then the other parts of courage, as you just described them, are, I would say 100% are. And then even before all of that, and this is kind of where courage ends up taking us, and we can pull back from this as well. But before all of that, there's the courage to look inward at oneself and evaluate myself, how prepared I am. Do I have the tools necessary, including a sufficient amount of courage? Now, I would argue that the thing that's the most courageous anyone can do is actually look inward. It sounds crazy. I understand that, but I really believe it takes them. I know incredibly brave people that have done things so novel that, say in a military setting, that requires so much bravery. Yet, this form of internal introspection is something that I would say they describe as terrifying.
One thing I want to put forward is you can also look inwards from a place of self-criticism that's more negative. I wouldn't frame it as courage. I would actually frame it as being a fearful thing. You're looking inwards because you see something that you don't like. You're afraid of that thing. So how do you draw a line between those two things?
So I think a lot of people instinctively are self-critical. And that's where there is this intuition for most people. I think they are looking at themselves and they're knowing a thing. But what a lot of people use is escapism tactics, whether it's diving into your phone, social media, addictions of some sort, television, doom scrolling, all of those things, just to avoid having to face that. And I think that's where, at the base of Transferable Everything, it all begins with a mirror. And that's why courage is, I've been thinking about courage as literally number one above vision or number two. As of right now, it's number two in the framework. But it almost begins with this sort of, you can imagine this, there's a mirror there into sort of the essence of who I am. And I have to lay myself bare and naked and stand in front of that. And then I have to face all of the things, including the things that I'm knowingly critical of.
Right.
And that's terrifying. You have to face, and it's layered too. So you might muster up the courage to do it the first time, and then there's more layers to it.
Sure.
There's corners untouched, maybe. For all of us.
I'm sure you've heard it said that you can lie to somebody, but you can't lie to yourself. But people lie to themselves all the time.
Yeah.
So surely the courageous act is choosing not to lie to yourself anymore.
Perfectly put. And to seek help with that, and that's where we'll touch on it on the next episode is humility. But then to be courageous enough to open yourself to somebody else to support you on that journey.
Sure.
And that now you're bare for not just yourself in the mirror, but somebody else. And that's terrifying.
Sure.
It's absolutely terrifying. But so many people that have, and this is why so many people who have gone through the experience, they'll sort of evangelize the experience, is because they know how transformative it can be.
Yeah, well, it's a literal metamorphosis to scrub your outward facing persona, even if slightly, to expose more of your true self to that support system.
Absolutely. And it's not an overnight thing. It's and this is one of the things that I've wanted to try and make sure that is clear in the book is that this is cyclical, right? You don't do the work once, and that's it. Even if there is this massive awakening and metamorphosis, as you described it, it's continued work, and it's not easy, and you will fail. And downstream in the framework, we talk about failure because you have to be prepared for that.
Sure.
Because even if you nail it the first time and you get through this, a year later, however frequent you're sort of working through this, if you intentionally want to use the framework, you are going to fail.
Sure.
It's
eventually.
Yeah. So we were talking about the internal fear, or the courage to look inward. And I thought, I don't know if this is going to be exactly in the book, but there's a little paragraph that touches on this, and I thought it'd be interesting to kind of read it, and it really highlights this. So the paragraph reads, "What I have learned is that the courage to walk into the fortress, into the darkness, is the greatest act of courage we can take, and one that ultimately matters most, because it's the one that frees us from all exterior fear. This is why Transferable Everything begins right here. If you lack the courage to look within yourself critically, objectively, and with productive self-awareness, then you are destined to continue searching for answers in all of the wrong places, to seek solutions in the wrong external things, to perpetuate the same patterns and make the same mistakes." Now, it does begin with courage, and there's a couple of things that I had mentioned in there. It's doing so, like, once you muster the courage to say, okay, I'm gonna kick open that inner fortress, as sort of the Stoics would say, the inner citadel, if you will. Then comes everything else. But it begins with the willingness to sort of kick that door in, to breach that door and say, I'm going inside of the fortress. And so then comes things like doing so critically, objectively, and what do those things mean, and trying to unpack those things. And that's kind of been one of the challenges in writing the book, is it feels so broad.
Sure.
Yet I also want to write it in an accessible way for non-readers, and very palatable chapter sizes.
Yeah.
So it's there for everyone. So trying to be really concise, not to over discuss anything, and really get to the root of it. But even with that, there's so many layers to even that, like I just described. Okay, well, what's critical? Like, how do you do that critically? How do you do it objectively?
Or even the notion of the fortress. If people aren't really thinking or speaking in these terms, do they know that they've built this fortress around them?
Right.
I assume that's why certain cognitive therapies and so forth exist, to help people break those walls down.
Yeah.
But that's a different case.
Yeah. And so much of this is, in a way, it's exploratory, or it has been for me. And now I feel like, okay, we can put these ideas into the world for people to critique. It's why I love so much that poem of the man in the arena. And although oftentimes social media and podcasts are used by people who are not in the arena, who are critics, in this particular case, trying to do so as the man in the arena.
Sure, you want to be a practitioner.
That's right. And to take the risk of putting these ideas in the hopes that it serves others in the same way that it served me. Maybe it's useless for some, and that's okay too. And I think in saying that, one of the things I've also learned about courage is that, because I said at the beginning, I've had to face the courage, and 3 years ago, I would say, we talked about the idea of this podcast. And it's taken 3 years. I've had the fear, and there's been justifiable reasons not to, and that's fine. And so I can look at that, but there's been an incredible amount of the fear. But how do you stand up, especially when it's like in a public domain, to say the things or to put the ideas out there,
Sure.
knowing that they'll be critiqued. And that's having the self-confidence in knowing that you've put in the work,
Yeah.
you've lived this,
Mhm.
and in your heart, it's for the right reason.
Sure.
It's because I'm trying to, your intentions are pure behind it.
Mhm.
And without that, I can't imagine having to face what would feel like an insurmountable obstacle.
Sure.
And so I think that's also critically important for reaching in and pulling out courage.
Yeah. I mean, in the public sphere, particularly, but even amongst your close circle or your immediate sphere, there are going to be contrarians or people who disagree with you. Maybe because they think they're more correct than you are, or maybe they're just being nefarious for, like sick reasons. Yeah, it's all to say it is certainly a challenge to put yourself out there. But actually having lived it and experienced it and knowing that there is value drives a purpose to actually get this out.
Yeah. And I think, if we use this as a bit of a use case, because we're living it right now and concurrently having to face it and deploy the courage necessary. In what you described, what we were talking about not too long ago, about looking at like the worst case scenario. So the worst case scenario is one of two things. People hate it. That being said, regardless of their intentions, even if someone hates your ideas that you're putting out into the world and it's coming from a bad place, you might be able to actually learn something from it. Maybe there is some empathy that wasn't properly deployed and reading the marketplace and what people would be interested in. Sure. if that's the case. And so now you've learned something from it. Or you're going to be looking internally and probably learning a little bit more about yourself. Again, even if it's coming from a bad place for those people.
Sure.
And so you've just forcibly created a new experience.
Right.
And one that's novel.
As well, there might also be some criticism that's exceptional.
Yes.
And allows you to reframe your lens.
Yes. And then the other is that you might completely fail. And that's true of so many things.
Sure.
And I think that's what scares so many people. Especially once you say, hey, I'm going to do this thing.
Sure.
And even if people don't ridicule you, they might expect you to fail, or they might say, oh, that's great. And then, you do fail. And now they're having drinks on a Friday, Saturday night with another group that knows you well and saying, I knew this guy was going to fail. I knew this was going to happen. And like, how do you become okay with that? At least for me, and I'm curious of your thoughts, is that like, that doesn't matter because of that intent behind it is that this thing served me, and there's a chance that it might serve somebody else. And so then that's enough. This sense of responsibility almost can come into play. I don't know.
I think you're on the right track for how I feel as well. Bringing it back to my cat in the box comparison is when it comes to decision making, you have like projects, whatever you would classify this as, that's inside the box right now. And so I don't know if it's this hyper successful, incredible piece of work, or if it's a complete failure.
Right.
But I do know that the project has purpose and meaning. Whether it's for me, if I affect only one single person, I would say that's enough. I would consider that a success. However you scale the success, whatever that may be, I don't want to anticipate that.
Yes.
But I don't want to anticipate the failure either. I just recognize that it's a possibility.
Exactly. And I think allowing yourself, just like we were talking about earlier, in this space, to put stuff out there and it sort of be inconsequential of which way it goes, means that you can't be impacted one way or the other.
Yeah.
You're sort of you have this guard around you in a positive way. And, I think downstream of success, that also means that you can avoid things like audience capture potentially and things like that, because it's not about that. That's not the motivation. You're not running towards
It's
the
supplemental.
accolades. Exactly. I think probably Gary Vee talks about that the most. Of, he doesn't, someone could compliment him or criticize him. Neither of those things impact him.
Right.
Because the feedback that he's looking for is from himself or like his mom, maybe. Like someone that he deeply, deeply cares about.
Yeah.
And, as long as his family's healthy and, he's doing the things that are purposeful and meaningful for him, then the rest is just noise.
Sure.
And I've been listening to him for like, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And, that message has always been the same, that he said numerous times. And it's something that I've always wondered in trying to, be empathetic and imagine myself in his position. Like, how do you get to that place?
Yeah.
And ironically enough, I finally feel like I'm in that place.
Right on.
Not without a ton of work.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, it comes down to the practice of doing the thing,
Yes.
doing the work, executing on the project. This is just the project being filmed.
Yeah. Right. And so there's courage that, we can reflect on, and then there's courage in real time.
Sure.
And I think, we didn't plan this, but this is kind of interesting because this is the best use case that I think we can draw on is one of the points of Transferable Everything is so that we don't have to analyze or reflect on something 10 years down the road, which we kind of did. Like I shared some examples, you shared some examples of things in hindsight.
Sure.
And concurrently, we're using a use case of something that's happening in real time as we're sitting here facing the courage to do the thing. And that's what Transferable Everything is supposed to be, is that we don't have to wait for 10 years for hindsight.
Right.
We can do it right now if we work through these things with intention and it's thoughtful. So we're learning lessons about courage, about all the other virtues that we're going to talk about as we're doing the thing.
Sure.
Which means we're growing in real time, or we at least have the opportunity to.
Sure.
And I think that's what's missed for so many people. And I think that's almost one of the solves, is how to learn now, not 10 years from now,
Right.
to re-look at an experience. And we're always going to have a new lens, sure. And it's still maybe helpful to go back with new lenses as we develop them and reanalyze, and is there anything more? But we should still be analyzing it today in the moment, asking ourselves, what can I learn from this situation? What can I learn about myself, others, the people around me? What lessons have I learned? Okay, I learned this. Okay, great. Now, I might forget some of the details of the experience, but the lesson is the thing I want to hold on to. Now I want to file this in the filing cabinet of my brain,
Sure.
and use recall later when a similar experience comes knocking. And I think that's ultimately the goal. And to think that it begins with courage and facing that mirror and the willingness also means that it's a choice. And that's also something that we want to start with, is that we each have agency.
Sure.
I know that's a controversial topic, especially if Sam Harris is in the room. But let's at the very least operate under the pretense that we have agency and we can have choice.
Right.
Because what's the value in thinking otherwise?
Yeah.
Right? Just Jesus take the wheel?
Regardless of notions of predestiny and so forth. Like, I am existing in this moment. Something is going to happen next. If I can control or have some agency over that, of course I should be taking it.
Yeah. And even if I can't have the actions, can I at least have agency over how I evaluate what just happened?
Yeah.
And what I could learn from it? And so it then begins with a choice. And I think that's kind of where vision, I think I landed on being number one, is, and maybe this is why this is a fun workshop, is maybe vision should be changed to choice.
Or a step further would be awareness.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if you could call that a virtue or a trait, but in terms of accessibility and allowing people to walk down this line of thinking requires one to be exposed to it.
Yeah.
For there to be a shared language.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's key. And it's probably something that I'm sure at some point, anyone who listens to every episode might pick that up as a continued theme, is shared language.
Yeah.
But I think it is important because language has evolved over time. We have the luxury of a shared language. Excellent nod. We have the luxury of a shared language. Had that not been developed, over time, evolved, then we wouldn't be able to communicate.
Right.
And so if we want to communicate about something, we need to have a language around it.
Sure. It's a nomenclature.
That's right. That's right. And so the vision, choice, agency begins there. Do I want to be someone of courage? And I think that's a bit of the paradox or the dichotomy of Transferable Everything. This will also be reiterated probably in every chapter episode. But I think it's so important, is that there is the framework, but then there's also the development of the characteristic, attribute, or trait, whichever one it is within the framework. All of those can be developed. So if I were to evaluate myself out of 100 on that bar graph we'll have talked about so many times, and say, I think my courage level currently is at 65%. Well, I can increase my level of courage. I need to expose myself to things that I'm fearful of. And it doesn't have to be big moments, like jumping out of an airplane if I'm afraid of heights.
Right.
It can be slow, sort of a slow exposure to the thing. But take this from Hormozy a bit, is stacking the evidence that you are who you say you are. I want to be someone of courage. I need to act courageously.
Sure.
Expose myself to those moments. And then when I evaluate myself on that bar chart, that bar graph, I can say, hey, I've increased, even 1%. It doesn't matter, right? Even just the 1%. 65, now I'm at 66%.
Yeah.
And I think that too many times we want the big leaps, but it can't always be that.
Sure.
And sometimes it's not helpful to be that. 1% at a time.
Yep.
And, a year from now, 2 years from now I'm a person with 80%
Sure.
courage to the level that I'm hoping to achieve.
Yeah. Though I would add, and this could probably be teased out more than how I'm going to say it, but your percentage out of 100 can be context specific as well.
Yeah.
And that it can change case by case. I can speculate or hypothesize on how courageous I would be in unknown territory, things I haven't experienced, where I could say, yes,
Sure.
I would do this, I would do that, but you really have to practice it or experience it to really gauge. So I would just pull it back and say, in terms of the analysis on where you stand on that courage bar, you really need to be thinking in terms of, where do I need to be courageous? Where have I been courageous? And how can I honestly score myself to create that final X out of 100?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good point. Thank you. And even at that, it's also subjective, right?
Sure.
Because maybe what my 100 looks like is different from yours,
Sure.
Or whomever. But I think that's kind of like if we were to distill success, and we were to, which is also subjective. Success for me looks different than you. Okay, and that's something we have to accept. And the level of courage will look different.
Yeah.
And especially if we tie it to identity. success, identity, and all of that is subjective. And so that's okay. Our courage can look different. It can be subjective. And I'm working towards what I think 100 is. Now, this is where the Matthew McConaughey speech comes in. Maybe you get so close to 100, which let's be honest, I thought I was jumping out of airplanes, and you know, doing stuff that required courage during my time in the military, even though I didn't deploy. It still required courage. And, you know, I had faced so many opportunities where I had to be courageous, being by myself on the streets in France at the beginning stages of what I thought would be my professional career, dealing with the failure, the possibility of failure. And then fast forward what feels like a lifetime, and I'm an entrepreneur and I'm in business, and you have to make payroll, and, you know, failures at your doorstep, and the level of courage I had to deploy there was unimaginable. And so now what 100 looks like to me is vastly different than it did 10 years ago.
Sure.
Or, you know, whatever the case may be. And so experience taught me differently. But just because those goalposts move, you know, that's the adaptability, and that's, you know, also downstream in the framework is it once looked like this. I got dangerously close to 100, and then I reevaluated as life taught me differently. And so are we ever actually going to reach 100? Probably not.
When it comes to jumping out of airplanes, I will never even reach 1%.
Well, maybe we'll have to film him doing it.
No shot.
But yeah, there's, you know, there's levels to it, and those levels
course.
change and so forth. And to your point that you said earlier about not knowing, like almost like not knowing what you don't know. And so how prepared are you to have to be courageous for a thing that you don't see coming?
Yeah.
And entrepreneurship was one of those things. It's because you can't know. It's one of those things you have to experience in order to deeply understand it, especially for the level of fear. Empathy doesn't quite do it. It comes, you can kind of come close, but living it and feeling the weight of it is
Sure.
very different.
Yeah. Even at a base level of appreciating that people have like monetary responsibilities.
Yeah.
And knowing the impact that can have if you fail, that there's downstream consequences.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is why transferable everything beyond just the framework and just looking at really, there's actually a chapter, I don't know if it's going to have its place, but it's about metaphors. And so the metaphor for this is a lot of people can empathize and understand what it's like to be a parent or a spouse, have a family, and have to consider the importance of my job and making the money that you're making to pay the expenses for your family, rent, groceries, mortgage, whatever the case may be. And there's a weight to that that most people can understand. Well, that same idea of that weight is true in entrepreneurship. The only difference is if you really care for the people that are working for you, then that weight magnifies. Because although it's not exactly, you know, your spouse and children, your heart
Sure.
is sort of expanded and extended to those people at least in some capacity. And so holding the weight of what happens if you can't make payroll and things like that, it's insurmountable. It's a weight that that you do have to kind of experience, like I said, but you can, if you draw on that experience, and that's why it's transferable. You can look to what experiences do I have that might relate to this thing, and build empathy from that.
Yeah, and you just got me thinking about the flip side possibility, which unfortunately is that you have the hyper selfish, predatory, crony type business leaders who maybe don't feel that weight at all.
Sure. Now, okay, so I've been exposed to a lot of wonderful business leaders and executives. I can't think of a single founder or someone who's like really built a company that doesn't have that in them. There might be a caveat in there, but for the most part, that's been my experience. Now, that's not where things can change is, and I think this is why Charlie Munger, famously talks about incentives. Once you get into more corporate structures where the founders, their heart is no longer sort of at the forefront, which is a hard thing to balance. And I can appreciate that. Like trying to think about that conceptually, how do you achieve that is very challenging because you need to have a corporate structure because you have things like liability, you have risk, all of these things. And so you need to have all these checks and balances that are created, and those come in these corporate structures. And then you have to try and create incentives. And things like heart and virtue and character, they're not measurable. Like, people might say you can measure anything, and I've heard that in conferences. You can measure anything. Okay, maybe. I don't know how much you can like truly authentically measure those things in a corporate structured way. Maybe
you're talking like leaders measuring that in their employees?
Yeah, or the board measuring that in their C-suite. Right? And so, yeah, incentives matter, but most of the time we've, right or wrong, created incentives not even just because we think it's necessary or we believe in them, but because we need, no matter what, you need some level of outcome that is monetarily focused, and you want to be able to measure it. And so more often than not, that comes by way of things that impact money or are money related. Numbers that can be on spreadsheets and can be analyzed objectively by a board or people at various levels, third parties, whatever the case may be. Whereas if I was to say, okay, like let's measure someone's heart. I have a C-suite, I want to measure their heart. And I'm not the one that can put in those metrics. I just, as the board, I get to evaluate them.
Right.
That's a really hard problem to try and solve for. I don't know what the answer is. Hey, maybe AI will solve that. Who knows?
Yeah.
But all to say is I'm empathetic to those problems. And that's where like scale and size and being creative of problem solving in those spaces is, it impresses me for the people that do it well, because I think there's some really great case studies out there. And then for others, I'm not sure. Being a part of conscious capitalism, John Mackey of Whole Foods, he did a wonderful job, wrote a great book about it, and everything he did is beautiful. And I don't know how, like, the case study for any premium product, that's perfect. Like, he was a trailblazer in that way. But not every business and every product can be premium as well.
Right.
And so there could be financial constraints and things that can't be leveraged in the same way. And so, there's multiple things to think about. That being said, for me, one of the things I've done is I've looked at that case study. I've been fortunate to be part of conscious capitalism and in networks where I can meet with founders and executives that think in those terms, and then try and figure out how I can apply it in our space.
Sure.
And sometimes it doesn't always work, but that just means I have to be creative. I'm taking the principles, transferable everything. Whole Foods grocery store down to fire and life safety company. How can I bring those principles and make them relevant to us? And it's hard. So companies much larger than ours, I'm super empathetic to that.
Sure.
As I'm sure we'll continue to do over time. We deviated a bit from courage, but
I think maybe what I was getting at is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we can bring John Mackey back into the conversation with conscious capitalism.
Sure.
Was that viewed as being like a revolutionary take on business?
Yes.
Presumably took a lot of courage to operate that way. That's more or less what I was getting to with
Sure.
with taking the family framework and then applying that to business. Being able to treat the people you work with or the people who work for you with that level of empathy and care is in a way a courageous act because it's non-traditional when you think about business structures of the past.
Yeah, I'm so happy you took that there. And I think that's really important. So as far as I understand, what John did would have taken immense courage. Now, if I can draw it on as a parallel to some of my experience and, working together, you can appreciate this because you've seen this in real time. It was interesting. I just had a meeting and this was brought up. A lot of what we've done in our industry sometimes seems simple, but it's taken a lot of courage from me and I think everybody else, to say that, okay, where every other company, maybe, allegedly, is cutting corners on certain components within the industry. We're not going to do that intentionally. And so I don't know officially whether they do or not. But when we hire somebody that comes from another company, I know that we have to do training. Even for somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, as a reminder of this is our standard. And that comes at a cost. And so that's where the courage comes in. It comes at a financial cost. It comes at a reputation cost. Because by doing so, whenever you sort of live your life, this is at the individual side of things, but I think this is true in business. Whenever you live in a way where you're doing something that somebody isn't, it sort of holds the mirror for them, like we were talking about earlier. And so it can hold the mirror for others, which means they might be upset with us or me because we're performing to this level. Now, it's not that we can't make mistakes and all of those things, but mistakes are different from intentionally not doing something. And I think that's an important distinction. And so I don't want to imply to anybody that, I know that they're not.
Right.
However, we know that we are intentionally following all of the codes and standards and so forth.
Sure. And
that's been eye-opening for a lot of people coming in. So we know at least that, and I can definitely say that's required courage. So I can't imagine, this is in our little microcosm, whereas, John did so many different things within Whole Foods grocery store that would have been, I can only imagine, as a threat to other grocery stores, from the employment side to the quality of products side, and everything in between. And so, I don't know. It's been a while since I've read his book, how much he's talked about the courage that it's taken. But maybe one day he'll sit beside us and we can ask.
Yeah, and I hope to reread the book before that.
Absolutely. We've discussed so much about courage in so many different domains, but I kind of want to tie this back to athletics because, my hope is that through this podcast and maybe later books and some work that we can do is to help athletes and their parents and coaches as well to use the sandbox of athletics, of the athletic endeavor, to really foster and develop with intention these traits. And so courage, for example, shows up every time you put on your shoes and you step on the field, the court, in the arena.
Sure.
Wherever the domain of athletics is that you're playing. And every time you go home and you say no to an event with friends or you have to make sacrifices, right? Like we can look at it through the lens of, okay, well, I'm making sacrifice. But that begins with courage. You have to be courageous enough to say, no, I'm sorry. This thing means more to me than this thing. This is necessary for me to achieve the thing. And so that landscape is just rich with opportunities to learn and grow that bar graph and build that evidence that you are who you say you are. If you can deeply think about it and understand it. I mean, that's just showing up, that's saying no after the fact, and then there's everything in between. It's, say, in a soccer game, you're down 2-1. You have to have the courage to take risks offensively.
Sure.
To try and score, to lose the ball, to make a more risky pass than you otherwise might if you were winning 3-1, whatever the case may be. And so I know we've used these examples and will continue to use them. Can you think of a moment in your life of athletics where you had to be courageous?
Almost certainly, but like I said earlier, it's context specific, so the version of fear that I felt is a little different.
Sure.
So when I first decided to train BJJ, yeah, I knew I was going to get stomped. So I was a little fearful of that.
Sure.
I struggle with meeting new people,
Right.
and opening up to them, even on a very basic level. Even I find small talk difficult most of the time. So I'm going into a scenario where I need to meet like 80 people, most of whom I know aren't really going to care about who I am because I'm the new guy and they don't expect me to last very long, whatever, that's fine. But that in itself took a huge amount of courage on my part just to be like, no, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great example because in the last episode we talked about, with the last guest, with Stevie, I talked about the importance of putting yourself in a situation where you can try something new, where you can be the person that's brand new. For me, that was becoming a firefighter at, in my mid-30s, really. And, being a business leader, entrepreneur by day, and then being a recruit in the evening. And that's a fearful experience. And I think that's sort of in essence what you're describing. And so there's a lot of courage to do that, to show up not knowing anything, to be judged of having no knowledge, and then all of the other things that are unique to yourself, like having to speak to people in sort of like
there's many different things converging into one point.
Right.
And then an alternate example, which is weightlifting, which I do way more frequently than jiu-jitsu, is say you have a powerlifting program that you're running. And it's a 12-week program, and you have all of your numbers set, and you start getting up to the later weeks where I'm afraid of missing a number.
Right.
Because if I do, that means I've failed, and I have to reset. And in some cases, it's like, I'm scared I'm going to tear a pec, or I'm scared I'm going to get crushed under a weight, or what have you. So it's a cautious courage or an approach to that in some way.
Yeah.
But courage nonetheless, because I still have a goal that I want to reach, and I'm not going to allow that fear to stop me from reaching that goal.
Yeah. It's sort of like and we have a chapter on this on grit and resilience. And it sort of touches on that in Angela Duckworth's work in her book, Grit, talking about like the importance of having a purpose. Yeah. Which, that in of itself is transferable to, drawing in Man's Search for Meaning, the importance of cognitive behavioral therapy and all of those things. And so it kind of does begin with the courage to look at and to even analyze all of those things within us, to know that they exist. Because you can't take action on anything if you don't know they exist. Sure. And there's the awareness that you're describing. You're aware that you have a fear of this thing. Right. And I think sometimes, actually, probably in many cases, people are afraid of a thing and not so aware that they're afraid of a thing.
Sure.
And it shows up in something different. It shows up as something different. It shows up as a change in behavior. It shows up in this weird aversion or this cognitive dissonance of, self-justifying, avoiding it without knowing that it is fear. And so that awareness becomes key. And actually, that being said, the last step in the framework is self-awareness. And so hopefully through that, we can achieve the awareness.
Sure.
And through creating this intentional thought process. And from that, you can build levels. Now that you're more aware, now you can think more critically. You can go deeper and deeper into new levels. And that's why it's cyclical, I think.
Sure. And at a certain point, and obviously this is context specific to weightlifting, but I'm sure it's also applicable to sport, which is that you can mobilize fear a certain way once you're able to also be able to overcome it with courage.
Yeah.
You kind of decide what you do with that fear.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like all things. First, you must identify, and we actually have this as well, identify the problem for what it is. And even if that's within, what are the things you need to be courageous in the face of, you identify it, and then only then you can create a solution. And so in my experience playing soccer, there were so many things that I was afraid of. In athletics, for me, as a soccer player, if we take away things like the courage when I moved to the south of France with all the unknowns, long before that, there were much smaller versions of courage. And I think, I'm going to tie this back to your weightlifting, right? You had to build a program to be able to lift heavier weights. Right? And that's effectively what this is. And we're not the first people to discuss this analogy, but it's cliche for a reason because it's true. So long before I ever become the soccer player by myself, facing real failure on the streets by myself, trying to figure it out. 4 years before that, I was flying by myself just because I had to England to meet my team to play professional academies in England. And there was somebody there waiting for me at the airport. So the portion where I had to be by myself was small. And there's someone within the airline that if you're not comfortable, they'll guide you and stuff. But when I landed in Heathrow, so I had to take a connecting flight to Manchester, I told them I was fine because I'd already done that the year prior. I'd flown to Heathrow.
Heathrow's a monster airport too, right?
Yeah. Admittedly, it was daunting. And I had to change terminals to take my connecting flight to Manchester and meet my team. But I knew someone was there at the other end. And I was afraid, but as long as you can sort of take a breath, there's signs. You just have to follow the signs. They'll tell you how to get there. Slow things down a little bit. Look at the sign. Does it say that? Yes, no. And sort of it became like a flow chart of working through. But it required courage. But, and there was some reluctance for me to fly alone, of course, from my parents, not knowing that I was at 18 going to be going to France by myself and in this scenario. So had I not had all of these, in retrospect, more micro experiences that required courage, I wouldn't have been prepared for that huge lift experience in the south of France.
Yeah, those small exposures helped build a little bit of tolerance before the big one.
Yeah. No one walks up to deadlift 225 from nothing. Not that 225 is a lot for the weightlifters out there.
It's a lot for a lot of people.
It is. It is. And it's accessible for virtually everyone.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think using that weight is appropriate for the analogy.
Yeah.
But no one does that. You first start by being coached on the mechanics of a deadlift. Can you walk over and lift it? Yeah. Okay. Sure, you
Or
can.
you might slip a disc while you're doing it.
Right. It's the value of coaching.
Sure.
Right. And so first you learn the mechanics, and you have someone work with you. They critique you as you're lifting it, and maybe to a point where, okay, now I'm pretty sufficient. I can do this on my own. And so that's really just development. It's learning a new thing and it's developing it. And the same thing is true with courage. And so you might start with the bar to learn the mechanics, and then you add 25 pounds on either side, maybe, depending on the coach's ideas, and or some band resistance, whatever their strategy is. And then you build from there through repetitions. And courage and every other virtue and characteristic is the exact same to that analogy. But when you show up to the gym, however many times a week your program is, you're doing so with intention.
Right.
And I think that's this operative word, which is also cliche right now, and it's been a bit co-opted, but I think it's really important.
Sure. But I mean, what's the opposite of having intention? Is that being aimless?
It could be, yeah, aimless, or just expecting to develop these things in this as a byproduct.
You have practice, which
Right.
obviously, but intentional practice is what you really need to get results.
Yes, yes, and we talked about this a little bit with Stevie when we were talking about soccer as an example. I think it was brought up, and that's the 10,000 hour rule, and it being sort of corrected from Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers to 10,000 intentional hours of practice, not just whatever frivolous hours. And so that analogy of intention, and I don't know that we got into this in the introduction, but at the risk that we did, and some of these things will be repetitive anyways, it's one of the things that I find the most interesting because, and I think we did talk about it, but when I analyze all of the skills needed to become a professional soccer player, a professional project manager, whatever the domain is, to be the best parent you can be,
Right.
firefighter, whatever. There's all of these technical skills. But above them are these virtues that we're talking about, and ones that we felt were very critical.
Sure.
Yet all of our resources in terms of money, time, energy, and education coaching goes to the bottom ones. All of our intention, we intentionally develop the bottom ones. How many of us, and myself included, at big points, like major points in my life, intentionally try and develop the characteristics and attributes,
Sure.
and get support in that. And I don't think it's a lot from my experience.
No, and it's really bang for buck type stuff. If you can intentionally practice the execution of those things,
Yeah.
you could take patience, for example.
Yes.
Loads of people who are impatient, they blow up over just the slightest inconvenience because they're not practicing patience.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of time to build that up, but everything takes a lot of time to be good at. You have to do it and do it intentionally.
Yeah. And it begins with the choice, having the agency. Do you want to be someone with patience? I think most people would say yes.
For sure.
And then it's like, okay, so you want to be that. So what are you doing about it? Becomes the question. And that leads to the intention.
Sure. And then, maybe you could get into territory of them identifying what their tolerances are and maybe justifying their impatience in certain realms. And so that's, it's another wall that you need to break down to get into that true inner citadel where you can confront those things about yourself.
Absolutely. And to kind of wrap things up, the key part about this again is that it is accessible to everybody because you don't need the novel, crazy, big experience to learn patience. It's just something that we practice every day in the quiet of our own home, our own space, with ourselves while we're driving to work, while we're still sleepy in the morning making breakfast, and we spilled the milk. Or that person cuts us off and we don't deploy empathy. Maybe they didn't mean to. We immediately jump. And those are this fertile ground, everyday life, for the opportunity to develop these attributes and virtues,
Sure.
just like patience.
The landscape is rich.
Absolutely. James, as always, thank you for such a fruitful conversation. And everybody that's listening, watching, I can't express enough gratitude for you taking the time to walk on this journey with us. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks.